The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their empire stretched across 1,000 worlds. They had conquered hundreds of species, some through war, most through fear. The Concord believed they were the masters of everything that existed in the darkness between stars. When their deep space sensors detected strange signals coming from a small yellow sun, they did what they always did. They sent a fleet to investigate. The signals were primitive. Radio waves, television broadcasts, the simple noise of a young civilization just learning to speak to the void. The planet was called Earth by its people. It was small, blue and green, filled with creatures who called themselves humans. The Concord watched them for several years. They saw their wars, their hatred, their endless fighting among themselves. The aliens found it amusing. These humans were like children pulling each other's hair. They would be easy to control. Ambassador Vethkai was chosen to deliver the writ of integration. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 eyes that never blinked. He had done this work for 200 years. He had brought 63 species into the Concord. All of them had submitted. All of them had knelt. This was how things worked. The strong ruled. The weak obeyed. His flotilla arrived in Earth's orbit on a spring morning. 12 ceremonial ships, their hulls painted gold, their weapons hidden but ready. They positioned themselves above the planet's largest cities. They waited for the humans to notice them. It did not take long. Within hours, the planet below went mad with activity. Satellites turned to watch them. Radio signals flooded every frequency. Aircraft rose into the sky to get closer looks. The humans were scared. Vethkai could taste their fear even from orbit. It was delicious. He sent the writ down to the planet's surface. It was translated into every human language. The message was simple. The Concord ruled this region of space. Earth was now part of their territory. Humans would surrender all weapons. They would accept Concord governors. They would provide workers and resources for the empire. In return, they would be allowed to live. This was generous, Vethkai thought. Other species had been given worse terms. Some had been wiped out entirely for refusing. But the Concord preferred obedient servants to dead enemies. Dead species could not mine ore or build ships. Vethkai waited for the response. He expected panic. He expected desperate politicians begging for mercy. He expected scientists asking questions and military leaders making empty threats before they surrendered. This was how it always went, but Earth was silent. 1 day passed, then 2, then 3. Vethkai grew impatient. He sent the writ again. He demanded a response. He reminded the humans of what would happen if they refused. Orbital bombardment. Their cities turned to glass. Their oceans boiled away. Their children sold into slavery across the galaxy. Still, Earth said nothing. By the 5th day, Vethkai was angry. By the 6th day, he was confused. No species had ever responded this way. Even the proudest warriors eventually sent someone to negotiate. Even the most stubborn leaders eventually asked for terms. But the humans simply went quiet. Their radio signals continued. Their aircraft still flew. But no one spoke to the Concord. On the 7th day, a single transmission finally reached the flotilla. Vethkai opened it himself. He expected surrender. He expected an apology for the delay. He expected the usual promises of cooperation and loyalty. Instead, he received 5 words in cold, flat text. "We do not send envoys." Before he could respond, another message arrived. "We are sending our answer." Vethkai ordered his sensors to scan the space around Earth. At first, they found nothing. The human spacecraft were primitive. Chemical rockets and fragile stations. Nothing that could threaten a Concorde vessel. Nothing that could even scratch their paint. Then something emerged from behind Earth's moon, thought it was a ship. But it was unlike anything Vethkai had ever seen. It was black. Completely black. No gold paint. No ceremonial markings. No windows or decorations of any kind. It was angular and sharp, like a blade made of shadow. It moved through space with a silence that made Vethkai's 4 hearts beat faster. The ship was ugly, brutal. It looked like it had been built by creatures who did not care about beauty or tradition. It looked like it had been built for only one purpose. War.ve Takai's officers began to panic. They ran scans on the vessel. The readings made no sense. The hull was made of materials the Concorde had never seen used this way. The engines burned with a power that should not exist on such a primitive world. The weapon systems were hidden, but the energy signatures were massive. What is that thing? One of his officers whispered. Vethkai did not answer. He was staring at the name painted on the ship's hull in simple white letters. UN. Prometheus. The vessel moved toward the flotilla. It did not hurry. It did not slow down. It came forward with the steady patience of something that had all the time in the universe. Something that knew exactly what it was doing. Vethkai opened a communication channel. His voice shook slightly, though he tried to hide it. Unknown vessel, you are in violation of Concorde law. Stand down immediately or you will be destroyed. The response came in a human voice. Female. Calm. Almost bored. This is Commander Yuriko Tanaka of the United Earth Navy warship Prometheus. You delivered your terms. Now we deliver ours. Vethkai leaned forward. And what are your terms? Leave our system. Never return. Tell your masters that Earth is not interested in their empire. And if we refuse... There was a pause. When the human spoke again, her voice had changed. It was harder now, colder, like steel wrapped in ice. Then you will learn why we built this ship. You will learn what humans do when something threatens their home. You will learn that we did not survive ice ages and plagues and wars and ourselves by being peaceful. Vethkai felt something he had not felt in 200 years of service to the Concorde. Something his species had nearly forgotten existed. Fear. He looked at the black ship growing larger on his screens. He looked at his golden flotilla with their hidden weapons and ceremonial paint. He thought about the 63 species that had knelt before him. None of them had ever looked at him like this. None of them had ever built something like this, for the first time in his long life. Ambassador Vethkai wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The Prometheus continued forward, patient, silent, waiting, and Earth watched from below, holding its breath. Commander Yuriko Tanaka stood on the bridge of the Prometheus with her hands clasped behind her back. She was 53 years old. Her black hair was streaked with gray. Her eyes were dark and steady. She had served in 3 wars on Earth before the aliens ever arrived. She had lost friends. She had lost family. She had seen what humans could do to each other. Now, she would show the galaxy. The Prometheus had been humanity's secret for 40 years. When the first alien signals were detected decades ago, Earth's governments had realized the truth. They were not alone, and whatever was out there might not be friendly. So they had started building, quietly, secretly, using every piece of recovered alien technology they could find, using every brilliant mind they could gather. The ship was never supposed to exist. Earth's leaders had hoped they would never need it. They had hoped the universe would be kind. The universe was not kind. It never had been. Commander, her first officer said. The alien ambassador is requesting communication again. Tanaka nodded. Put him through. Ambassador Vethkai's gray face appeared on the main screen. His 4 eyes moved nervously. He was trying to look confident, but Tanaka could see the fear beneath his mask. She had seen that look before, on the faces of enemies who realized too late what they were facing. "Commander Tanaka," Vethkai said, "I urge you to reconsider. The Concord has ruled this region of space for 12,000 years. We have destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours. Your one ship cannot stand against the might of our empire." "Perhaps," Tanaka replied, "but we are not trying to defeat your empire today. We are simply telling you to leave." Vethkai shook his head. "You do not understand. If you resist, we will return with a war fleet. We will burn your cities. We will enslave your people. We will erase your culture from history. Is that what you want?" Tanaka smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who had stopped being afraid a long time ago. "Let me show you something," she said. She pressed a button on her console. The Prometheus began broadcasting directly into the minds of every alien in the flotilla. It was a technology they had stolen from the Concorde themselves. But instead of words, Tanaka sent something else. She sent memories. Human memories. Human history. The aliens saw everything. They saw the first humans crawling out of caves, clutching stone tools, fighting wolves and bears with nothing but courage and desperation. They saw ancient armies marching across continents, leaving empires in ashes. They saw the trenches of the First World War, where millions died in mud and poison gas. They saw the atomic fire over Hiroshima, where humans had split the atom and used it to burn their own kind. They saw genocides. They saw plagues. They saw famine and slavery and cruelty that stretched back to the beginning of human existence. They saw humans killing humans, again and again and again, for land, for gold, for gods, for ideas, for nothing at all. And through it all, they saw one thing that never changed. Humans refused to die. No matter how many fell, more rose to take their place. No matter how terrible the weapon, humans found a way to survive it and build something worse. No matter how hopeless the situation, there was always someone willing to fight, to sacrifice, to burn everything down rather than surrender. The broadcast ended. On the alien ships, crew members were trembling. Some had collapsed. Others were crying in ways their species had not cried for thousands of years. They had evolved past violence. They had forgotten what it felt like to be prey. Now they remembered. Vethkai stared at the screen with horror in his 4 eyes. "What? What are you?" Tanaka's voice was calm, almost gentle, like a mother explaining something simple to a frightened child. "We are what the universe made us. Every extinction event that should have killed us only made us stronger. Every war taught us new ways to fight. Every tragedy gave us new reasons to survive. You think we are primitive because we still kill each other. But that is exactly why you should be afraid." She leaned forward slightly. "We did not crawl out of our caves because we were peaceful. We crawled out because nothing could make us stay down. Not ice, not fire, not disease, not even ourselves." Vethkai opened his mouth to respond, but one of his officers shouted a warning. A scan had just completed on the Prometheus. The results were impossible. The ship's hull was made of materials that should not exist. Metals bonded at the atomic level. Armor that could absorb energy and convert it into power. And the weapons. The weapons were hidden, but the power readings suggested something terrible. Something the Concorde had never imagined a young species could build. "How?" Vethkai whispered. "How did you create this?" "You left your garbage scattered across our solar system for centuries," Tanaka said. "Crashed probes, lost satellites, pieces of ships that wandered too close. We found them. We studied them. We learned." Her eyes hardened. "And then we built something better. Vethkai made his decision. Fear turned to anger. Anger turned to pride. He was an ambassador of the Concord. He would not be threatened by primitives. All ships, he commanded. Open fire. The flotilla obeyed. 12 ships unleashed their weapons at once. Plasma beams. Kinetic rounds. Missiles that could crack a moon. The space around the Prometheus filled with light and fire. Tanaka did not flinch. She did not order evasive action. She simply watched. The Prometheus absorbed the barrage. Its black hull glowed red in places. Scars appeared across its surface. But it did not break. It did not burn. It kept coming forward, slow and steady, like a predator that had already decided its prey was dead. When the barrage ended, the Prometheus was still there. Damaged but functional. Hurt but not defeated. Vethkai felt his heart sink. Our turn, Tanaka said quietly. She gave a single command. The Prometheus fired once. Just once. A beam of light shot from the warship's main cannon. It crossed the distance between vessels in less than a heartbeat. It struck Vethkai's flagship directly in the center. The explosion was silent in the vacuum of space. But on every other ship, every alien saw their ambassador's vessel simply cease to exist. One moment it was there. The next, there was only glowing debris spreading outward like the petals of a dying flower. Tanaka opened a channel to the remaining ships. Leave, she said. Tell your masters what you saw here today. Tell them Earth is not interested in their empire. Tell them we do not negotiate. We do not surrender. We do not kneel. She paused, letting the words sink in. And tell them that if they come back, we will not stop at one ship. The remaining Concord vessels turned and fled. They jumped into hyperspace so fast they nearly tore themselves apart. They ran like prey animals who had just seen a predator's true face for the first time. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Tanaka watched them go. Her hands were still clasped behind her back. Her face was still calm. But inside, her heart was pounding. This was only the beginning. She knew that. The Concord would return with a real fleet. A war fleet. And Earth had only one warship, but they had something else too. Something the aliens had forgotten existed. They had the willingness to fight. To sacrifice. To die standing rather than live on their knees. The Prometheus turned and headed back toward Earth. Its mission was complete. For now, but the galaxy had changed forever. And nothing would ever be the same again. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On 1,000 worlds, aliens watched the recordings with disbelief. A primitive species from a backwater system had refused the writ of integration. They had destroyed a Concord vessel. They had sent the diplomatic flotilla running like frightened animals. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. It had never happened before in 12,000 years of Concord. Rule. And yet the evidence was undeniable. The survivors of the flotilla told their stories to anyone who would listen. They spoke of the black ship that emerged from nowhere. They spoke of the human commander with her cold eyes and calm voice. They spoke of the broadcast that had shown them humanity's history, the wars, the genocides, the atomic fire. They spoke of a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself and had somehow survived. They are monsters, one survivor whispered to a journalist. Not like us, not like anyone. They have no fear, no mercy. They look at death and they smile. The recordings of the battle were played on every news channel in Concord space. Species that had lived under the Empire's rule for thousands of years watched a single warship tear through a diplomatic flotilla like it was nothing. They watched the flagship explode. They watched the others run, and something strange began to happen. On the agricultural world of Desek-7, a group of workers gathered in secret to watch the recordings. They were Thrasani, a species that had served the Concorde for 6,000 years. They had been farmers and servants for so long that they had forgotten they were ever anything else. Their spirits had been broken generations ago, but when they saw the Prometheus fire its weapon, something stirred inside them, something old, something angry. They fought back, one of them said. They actually fought back. And they won, another added. The Concorde overseer of Thesek 7 was named Keth. He was cruel and arrogant, like all Concorde officers. He treated the Thrassani like animals. He beat them for small mistakes. He took their food when he was hungry. He had ruled this world for 30 years, and he had never once felt afraid. 3 days after the news from Earth arrived, Keth was found dead in his estate. His throat had been cut by one of his own servants. The weapon was a simple farming tool, the kind the Thrassani had used for generations. On the wall beside his body, someone had scratched a crude image, a black angular ship. Ugly and brutal. The symbol of the Prometheus. The Concorde sent investigators to Thesek 7. They found the killer quickly. She was an old Thrassani woman named Vesa. She had served Keth for 20 years. She had watched him beat her children. She had buried her husband after Keth worked him to death. When they asked her why she did it, Vesa smiled. "The humans showed us the way," she said. "They showed us that the strong are not always the winners. Sometimes the weak can rise. Sometimes the servants can become the masters." She was executed publicly as a warning to others. But the warning did not work. Instead, her death became a symbol. More overseers were killed. More images of the black ship appeared on walls and buildings. The whispers grew louder. The humans fight back. The humans do not kneel. Meanwhile, the Prometheus did not return to Earth. Commander Tanaka had new orders from the United Earth government. She was not to hide. She was not to wait for the Concorde to attack. She was to be seen. The warship jumped from system to system along the Concorde's border. It never attacked. It never threatened. It simply appeared in orbit around world after world, staying just long enough to be noticed before moving on. On every planet it visited, the oppressed species watched it pass through their skies. They saw the black hull scarred from battle. They saw the name painted in white letters. They knew what it meant. Hope. The Concorde High Senate convened an emergency session on their capital world. The great chamber was filled with representatives from the ruling species. They argued and shouted and blamed each other for the disaster at Earth. "We must destroy them immediately," Grand Admiral Zethros declared. He was the most powerful military commander in the Concorde. His species had ruled the Empire for 8,000 years. He had never known defeat. Send the war fleet. Burn their planet. End this embarrassment. And what of the rebellions? Another senator asked. Reports are coming in from across the Empire. Slave species are rising up. Overseers are being murdered. They are using the humans as inspiration. Then we crush them too, Zethros said. We have done it before. We will do it again. But other voices urged caution. They had watched the recordings from Earth. They had seen what the Prometheus could do. They had heard the stories of human history. These creatures are different, one senator said. His name was Velik, and he was considered wise among his people. They do not think like us. They do not fear like us. For 12,000 years, we have conquered species by threatening them with destruction. But these humans, they seem to welcome destruction. They have been destroying themselves since they first walked upright. He paused, letting his words sink in. How do you threaten someone who has already survived the worst thing imaginable? How do you break someone who has been breaking themselves for millennia? The chamber fell silent. Finally, Zethros stood. His scales glittered in the light. His eyes burned with cold fury. I do not care what they have survived. I do not care what they have done to each other. They are one world, one species, one ship. He looked around the chamber, daring anyone to disagree. "We are the Galactic Concord. We have ruled for 12,000 years. We will not be challenged by primitives." He raised his hand. "I am taking the Grand Fleet to Earth, 800 capital ships, the largest force assembled in 3,000 years. We will not negotiate. We will not offer terms. We will simply erase them from existence." The Senate voted. The decision was unanimous. The humans would be destroyed. As the session ended, Senator Velik watched Zethros leave the chamber. The old senator had lived for 400 years. He had seen many things. He had learned many lessons. One lesson stood above all others. Pride was dangerous. Overconfidence was deadly. And the most dangerous enemy was always the one you underestimated. He thought about the humans. He thought about their history of violence and survival. He thought about the black ship that refused to die. And for the first time in centuries, Senator Velik felt afraid. Not of the humans. Not exactly. He was afraid of what would happen when the Grand Fleet arrived at Earth. He was afraid that Zethros was not leading 800 ships to victory. He was afraid that Zethros was leading them to slaughter. Somewhere in the void of space, the Prometheus continued its patrol. Commander Tanaka stood on the bridge, watching the stars pass by. She knew the war fleet was coming. She knew Earth was not ready. But she also knew something the Concorde did not. Humanity was building more ships, working day and night. Volunteers from every nation, every culture, every corner of the planet. People who had never agreed on anything in their lives were now united by a single purpose. They would not go quietly into the darkness. And when the Grand Fleet arrived, they would learn what humans had known since the beginning of time. Survival was not given. It was taken. With blood and fire and the willingness to sacrifice everything. The galaxy had no idea what was coming, but it would learn soon enough. The Grand Fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system on a cold December morning. 800 capital ships. 3 million soldiers. The largest military force assembled in 3,000 years. Grand Admiral Zethros stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and smiled. He had waited his entire life for a battle like this. A chance to prove his power. A chance to crush something worthy of his attention. The humans had given him that chance. He would repay them by turning their world to ash. "Begin the approach," he commanded. "Standard formation. I want to see their faces when they realize what is coming for them." The fleet moved forward like a wave of death. Hundreds of vessels, each one capable of destroying cities from orbit. Their weapons charged. Their shields glowed. They filled the darkness with the light of their engines. Earth waited ahead. Small, blue, fragile, and, alone, Zethros frowned. His sensors showed no defensive fleet. No weapons platforms. Nothing but the planet and its primitive satellites. The Prometheus was nowhere to be seen. "Where is their warship?" he demanded. His officers searched frantically. They scanned every corner of the system. Nothing. The black ship had vanished. "Perhaps they fled," one officer suggested. "Perhaps they realized they cannot win." Zethros nodded slowly. That made sense. The humans had shown their one weapon, and now they had nothing left. Their resistance was over before it began. "No matter," he said. "Begin the bombardment. Target their largest cities first. I want them to know despair before they die." The fleet moved into position around Earth. Missiles were loaded. Targeting systems locked onto the planet below. 3 million soldiers watched and waited for the order to fire. Then the Prometheus appeared. It emerged from behind Jupiter, rising from the gas giant's shadow like a ghost from a grave. Its black hull was scarred from its previous battle. Its weapons were charged and ready, but it was not alone. Behind the Prometheus came 17 other ships. They were smaller, uglier. They looked like they had been built in a hurry by people who did not care about elegance or beauty. Their hulls were rough and unfinished. Their engines burned so hot they seemed ready to explode at any moment. They were the ugliest ships Zethros had ever seen. They were also filled with human beings who had volunteered to die. In the 7 months since the first battle, Earth had worked without rest. Every factory had been converted to build warships. Every scientist had focused on weapons and engines and armor. Millions of people had volunteered to crew the new vessels, knowing they might never return home. They had built a fleet from nothing. It was small. It was crude. It was held together by hope and desperation. But it was enough. Commander Tanaka opened the communication channel to the Grand Fleet. Her face appeared on every screen across 800 ships. This is Commander Tanaka of the United Sims United Earth Navy. You were warned not to return. You were told what would happen if you threatened our home. Zethros laughed. 18 ships? Against 800? You are brave, human. I will give you that. But bravery will not save you. Tanaka's expression did not change. Her voice remained calm. You should have brought more ships. The battle began. What followed would be remembered across the galaxy as the 17 minutes. 17 minutes of chaos and fire and death that changed the course of history forever. The human fleet did not fight like the Concorde expected. They did not form defensive lines. They did not try to protect their ships. Instead, they attacked. They charged directly into the heart of the Grand Fleet like predators rushing into a herd. The Prometheus led the way. Tanaka drove her ship through the center of the enemy formation, firing in every direction. Her weapons tore through Concorde vessels like claws through paper. Her shields absorbed hit after hit, glowing white with the energy of a dying star. Behind her, the volunteer fleet scattered into the enemy formation. They were faster than they looked, more maneuverable. They darted between the larger Concorde ships, striking at weak points and vulnerable systems. But they were also dying. The first human ship fell within 2 minutes. The Defiant, crewed by volunteers from South America, was overwhelmed by 5 Concorde cruisers. Its reactor went critical. Instead of exploding uselessly, the captain aimed his dying ship at the nearest enemy carrier and accelerated. The collision destroyed both vessels across the battlefield. Other human crews made the same choice. When their ships were too damaged to fight, they turned into weapons themselves. They rammed into enemy formations. They detonated their reactors inside clusters of Concorde vessels. They traded their lives for as much destruction as possible. Zethros watched in horror. He had never seen anything like this. The Concorde had fought many wars, but their enemies had always tried to survive. They had surrendered when defeat was certain. They had begged for mercy when their ships were destroyed. The humans didn't either. They kept fighting, even when their ships were burning, even when their oxygen was running out, even when they were the last ones alive on their bridges. They fought until they had nothing left, and then they used their own deaths as weapons. What are they? Zethros whispered. What kind of species does this? On the Prometheus, Tanaka felt her ship shudder as another hit struck the hull. Alarm screamed. Fire spread through the lower decks. Her crew was dying around her, but she did not stop. She could not stop. Every second she kept fighting was another second Earth survived. Every enemy ship she destroyed was one less threat to her home. She thought about her family. Her daughter was 12 years old. Her son was 8. They were somewhere on Earth right now, watching the sky and hoping their mother would come home. Tanaka knew she might not. She had accepted that when she took command of this ship, some things were worth dying for. Some things were worth more than any single life. The Prometheus broke through the center of the Grand Fleet. Behind it, only 6 human ships remained. 11 had fallen. 11 crews had given everything they had, but they had done what seemed impossible. The Grand Fleet was broken. Concorde vessels burned throughout the battlefield. Nearly 300 ships had been destroyed or disabled. The rest were scattered and confused, their formations shattered by the human assault. Zethros tried to rally his forces, but his communications were jammed. His command structure had collapsed. He had brought 800 ships to crush a primitive world. Now he was watching his fleet die around him. "Retreat," he ordered. His voice was hollow, empty. "All ships, retreat." The Grand Fleet ran. The most powerful military force in 3,000 years turned and fled from 18 ugly ships built by a species they had called primitive. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Tanaka watched them go. Her ship was barely functional. 3/4 of her crew was dead or wounded. She could feel blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead, but she was alive. Earth was alive. She opened a channel to the surviving human ships. There were only 6 left. 6 battered, broken vessels filled with people who had just accomplished the impossible. "Well done," she said. Her voice cracked with exhaustion. "Well done, all of you. You have made humanity proud today." She looked out at the debris field where 11 human ships had fallen. 11 crews who would never see their families again. 11 groups of volunteers who had given everything so that others could live. "We will remember them," she said quietly. "We will remember every single one." Behind her, Earth hung in the void, blue and green and beautiful, untouched by enemy fire. Safe because people had been willing to die for it. 17 minutes. That was all it had taken to change history. 17 minutes to show the galaxy what humans were capable of. 17 minutes to prove that some species would rather burn than kneel. The war was not over. Tanaka knew that. The Concorde would not accept this defeat. They would come again, with more ships, more weapons, more fury, but they would also come with fear. Fear of the species that had beaten them. Fear of the black ship that refused to die. Fear of a world that had looked at their ultimatum and answered with fire. Earth had won its first battle. Now it had to win the war. The destruction of the Grand Fleet sent shockwaves across the galaxy. For 12,000 years, the Concorde had been invincible. Their military might was legendary. Their rule was absolute. Every species that had dared to challenge them had been crushed without mercy. Now, their greatest fleet was scattered debris floating in the void of Earth's solar system. Nearly 300 ships destroyed. Hundreds of thousands dead. The survivors had fled in terror from a handful of primitive vessels. The Empire began to crack. On 40 worlds, rebellions erupted within the first month. Slave species who had served the Concorde for generations rose up against their masters. They painted the symbol of the Prometheus on their walls. They chanted the names of human heroes they had never met. They fought with farming tools and stolen weapons because they had finally seen proof that the masters could bleed. The Concorde tried to crush the rebellions as they always had. They sent soldiers. They burned cities. They executed leaders publicly as warnings to others. But this time, the fear did not work. Every time they killed a rebel, 10 more rose to take their place. Every time they destroyed a village, 3 more villages joined the uprising. The whispers had become shouts, and the shouts had become a roar that echoed across the stars. The humans fight back. The humans do not kneel, and neither will we. On Earth, humanity watched the galaxy burn and knew they had started something that could not be stopped. They were no longer fighting just for their own survival. They were fighting for every species that had ever been crushed under the Concorde's heel. Commander Tanaka, now Admiral Tanaka, stood before the United Earth Assembly and made a simple promise. We did not ask for this war. We did not want it. But we will not stop until every species in this galaxy has the freedom to choose its own future. Not because we are heroes, not because we are saints, but because we know what it feels like to be threatened with extinction. And no one should have to feel that way. Earth built more ships. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers from every nation. Scientists worked day and night to improve weapons and shields and engines. The entire planet united behind a single purpose for the first time in human history. The war lasted 3 years. It was brutal. It was bloody. Millions died on both sides. Human fleets fought across dozens of star systems, winning some battles and losing others. The Prometheus was nearly destroyed twice, saved each time by the sacrifice of escort ships who gave their lives to protect it. But slowly, steadily, the Concorde crumbled. Their empire had been built on fear. And fear is a fragile foundation. When the fear faded, there was nothing left to hold it together. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years joined together against their common oppressors. Concorde fleets found themselves fighting on 100 fronts, unable to concentrate their forces, unable to stop the bleeding. 1 year after the Battle of Sol, a coalition was formed. They called themselves the Free Stellar Compact. Their charter was simple. No species would rule another. No world would be enslaved. Every people would be free to determine their own destiny. Earth was asked to lead the coalition. Admiral Tanaka refused. "We are not your rulers," she said. "We are not your masters. We are just your allies, your friends, your partners in building something better than what came before." The war ended on a spring morning, 3 years after it began. The Concorde's capital world surrendered after its last fleet was destroyed in orbit. The emperor who had ruled for 8,000 years was captured and brought before a galactic tribunal. But he was not the only prisoner. Ambassador Vethkai was there too. He had survived the first battle, rescued from the debris of his fleet by Concorde ships. He had spent the war in a cell, watching everything he believed in collapse around him. Now he stood in a great hall, filled with representatives from 100 species. At the front of the hall sat a human woman with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes. Admiral Tanaka looked older now. The war had aged her. She had buried too many friends. She had made too many impossible decisions. But her voice was still strong when she spoke. "Ambassador Vethkai, 3 years ago, you came to our world with a simple message. Submit or die. You believed we were primitives. You believed we would kneel like every other species before us." She paused, letting the silence fill the chamber. "You were wrong." Vethkai lowered his 4 eyes. He had nothing to say. No defense, no excuse. He had been so sure of his power, so confident in his empire's invincibility. Now that empire was gone, and he was standing in judgment before the species he had once dismissed as animals. "We did not want this war," Tanaka continued. "We wanted to be left alone. We wanted to live in peace on our small blue world, exploring the stars at our own pace. You refused. So we reminded the galaxy what happens when you corner something that would rather die than submit." She stood and walked closer to the ambassador. Her voice softened, not with mercy, but with exhaustion. "We are not your rulers. We are not your saviors. We are just what you made us. A species that learned, long before we ever met you, that the universe does not care about the weak. We survived ourselves. Ice ages, plagues, wars that killed millions. We survived because we refused to give up. We survived because somewhere, in every generation, there were people willing to fight when fighting seemed hopeless." She looked around the chamber at the representatives of 100 species, all watching her with eyes that held something that had not existed in this galaxy for 12,000 years. "Hope. Surviving you," Tanaka said quietly, was almost easy. The tribunal voted to dissolve the Concord. Its leaders were sentenced to exile on distant worlds where they could harm no one. Its armies were disbanded. Its slave markets were closed forever. In place of the empire rose the Free Stella Compact, a coalition where no species knelt to another, where disputes were settled through diplomacy, not force, where every world had a voice and every people had dignity. It was not perfect. Nothing ever is. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still species who remembered old wounds and found forgiveness difficult, but it was better. So much better than what came before. 20 years passed. Admiral Tanaka retired to a small house on the coast of Japan. She spent her days watching the ocean and playing with her grandchildren. She had given enough to the galaxy. Now she wanted only peace. But sometimes, late at night, she would look up at the stars and think about everything that had happened. The battles, the sacrifices, the friends she had lost and the enemies she had made. She thought about the Prometheus. The old warship was still out there, patrolling the edge of known space. It had been repaired and upgraded many times over the years, but its heart was the same. The same black hull, the same white letters painted on its side, the same spirit of defiance that had faced the Concorde flotilla all those years ago. It was a symbol now, a reminder, a promise to anyone who might forget what humans were capable of. When pushed to the edge, young pilots competed for the honor of serving on its crew. Alien visitors requested tours of its battle-scarred decks. Children across the galaxy learned its story in school and dreamed of becoming heroes like the people who had crewed it. And somewhere in the void, the Prometheus kept watch. Old, battle-scarred, eternal. A reminder that Earth does not send envoys. Earth sends a promise that those who threaten the innocent will face consequences. A promise that no matter how dark the night, there will always be those willing to fight for the dawn. A promise that humans, for all their flaws, will never stop standing up for what is right. The galaxy had learned this lesson the hard way. They would never forget it. And at the edge of known space, painted against the eternal darkness, the Prometheus continued its patrol. Waiting. Watching. Ready. Because that is what humans do. They survive. They fight. They protect. And they never, ever give up.